again speaking today with Dr. Eric Carlin. And Eric is the front man or the main songwriter for the group Eric Carlin and the Flood. Great to have you on the show today, Eric.
Thanks a lot, John. I appreciate it.
Now, Eric, for our listeners, could you get us started? Let's start with some background and tell us, when did you start playing music? And I know your main instrument is guitar, and you're also the vocalist.
Yes. I knew you were going to ask this, so I was before we started this, I started counting back the years. So I started to play guitar when I was 13, and I'm going to be 33 in April.
Okay,
so you
great.
Do the math.
Right, and that's easy math for me. I'm not a mathematician, but 20 years sounds really good.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
So we mentioned you play guitar, which I know you, and you're an expert on the guitar. You're a great singer. Are there other instruments that you play?
No, not really. I've tinkered around with the bass and mainly just guitar, classical guitar, electric guitar, acoustic guitar.
Great,
Anything
excellent.
more than 6 strings and I get confused.
No problem there. Now, what are some of those first songs that you learned on the guitar?
Oh, man, first songs. One that sticks out is More Than a Feeling by Boston.
Okay, great. Now, that is one of the first songs I learned on the guitar from one of my first music teachers, Ralph Louis Chicatano. Did you go to Ralph too then?
I certainly did, man. That's where I learned it.
Do you have a musical family, or are there musical memories from your childhood before that?
I definitely don't have a musical family. The only thing I can think is that, like late 80s, early 90s radio in my parents' car, unfortunately, was probably the first thing I was exposed to.
Okay,
but,
great.
I just got into it, kind of became obsessed with the guitar. I had to have one. And someone in our family, like a family friend, had acquired a guitar and gave it to me. And then a cousin of my grandfather's cousin, taught me, so it was my first teacher.
Okay, great.
So it was kind of grassroots, just watch him play chords. Here you go, figure it out.
And do you still have that guitar?
I do not.
Okay. Now, also thinking back to that time, are there some musicians that you admired that got you started, whether they be famous or even people that you knew?
Back then, man, I was really into, like, grunge, and I can remember, like, learning all the songs off of a Bush album.
Okay, 16 Stone.
Yep.
Great.
Who else? Anton comes to mind, local legend Anton. Because I used to stop in the music loft, every day, twice a day, and try to, try out the new song I learned on whatever guitars were in there.
Right, get a little sampling on every one of them.
Yep, show off for some friends, and Anton would show me something here and there. So that definitely comes to mind.
Great. Now, what about, so you mentioned Bush, 16 Stone, what about some other albums or certain songs that you really enjoyed back then? Or even now?
Man, I can remember an early song. Do you remember, I Am Still Living With Your Ghost?
Oh, Everclear, Santa Monica.
Everclear. Yes. Yeah, so once I heard, like, those kinds of bands and realized that a lot of the chords are the same,
Right, great.
Then I just ran with it. I was like, I can do this, I started to kind of figure things out, like power chords and riffs and stuff like that.
Great. Now, you've been playing then for 20 years.
Yep.
You've, obviously, we're mentioning some other bands that you've learned guitar chords by listening to.
Yep.
Now, take it right up to today. You're writing your own music, and how long have you been doing that?
I really, only a couple of years. 2 or 3 years, I'll say. Probably 3 years, yeah.
Okay.
I avoided it for a long time. I learned to sing and figure out people's songs, and I never could quite connect the dots of how to do my own thing. I was too sort of caught up in what it would sound like.
Okay.
I didn't really take myself seriously enough, I suppose.
Okay, sure. So just a few years then writing songs.
Yep.
This is your first album that we're pretty much promoting, I guess, today on
Absolutely.
1480 Club. And you're working with some musicians from the Rochester area, as well as some musicians from Hornell that you've worked with from time to time. Do you want to tell us about the band?
Absolutely. So everything got started. I started to write tunes a couple summers ago, and sort of the floodgates opened, and so I maybe wrote 3 songs in a week, and then I wrote 3 more, and eventually got in touch with the drummer, Chris Murtha, who, interestingly enough, he married Kathy Crowley from Hornell.
Okay, great.
So there's that that connection. And so Chris Murtha, and then one of his best friends, Nick Parker, plays the bass. And so I'd done some demo work the previous year and sort of just didn't do much with it. But I sent it to those guys, and they listened and liked it, and that kind of got the band going. And then I had won a songwriting competition, just a local thing in Rochester. Nothing really big, but the part of the prize was that you got 5 free hours of studio time.
Okay.
So that motivated me to want to do that, to record. And of course, I burned that up the first day, and it took a lot more than 5 hours for the album. And then eventually, so we had those tracks, and definitely they needed to be filled out more. It was just guitar, bass, and drums. Right. And so I brought in Tony Glicchio, who's a really old friend of mine and excellent organ player. And then Kurt Johnson came in and played some pedal steel.
Okay,
so grateful to those guys because they really filled out the songs,
And for me, being a musician in the area too, 2 Hornell area musicians who have some great Rochester connections as well, along with you.
Yeah, I mean, they're, from what I understand, like I have students at Nazareth College that are like on the music scene, and whenever I bring up Tony or Kurt, they're like, "Oh, you know them? You know them?" I'm like, "Do I know them?" Like, we grew up in basements,
right?
Like getting in trouble and playing music, and so they're becoming known as really good Rochester musicians.
Great.
So that's really cool to see.
Yeah, and really great to hear for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad they still remembered me and came to play on my CD.
And the number of tracks on this album?
There's 13.
Okay.
And I believe, 9 of them are full band tracks.
Okay.
And then I still had 4 tunes left from a demo that I had done, and I never did anything with it. My goal was for this album was to just put everything on it that I thought worthy and that I had, and just say, here, it's done.
Great.
And I did an album. And so the last 4 tracks are just me singing and playing. Some of them have maybe a guitar solo overdub or something like that.
Okay.
So,
now,
so I just called them bonus tracks.
Excellent.
There's clearly a difference between the sound that you hear,
Right. Great. Okay. So the 9 that are definitely recorded in the studio. What studio did you use?
I used the Green Room. It's run by Matt Rammerman.
Okay. Great.
Another known Rochester name. He's also a drummer.
Okay.
So he drums and freelances and then runs that studio. Super cool guy. Great to work with, and he really made it sound pretty polished.
Wonderful. And when you're working on those, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I didn't have anything else to say.
Okay. What I was going to ask was, working on those songs then, it sounds like you had most of them written then, and the band's just adding their instruments, adding their color on. Or were there some songs where everyone worked together?
Not really. I mean, mostly I had written the tunes and everything basically stayed the same. But what those guys added, really, it got me excited about them, to sort of hear. That's what kept me writing for a long time.
Okay.
Was not really knowing how they would come out, would they sound good, and once I jammed with those guys and kind of heard that they believed in them and what they could sound like, it was really interesting.
It really brings it to life then.
Yeah.
Your music.
Yep. And so they've created their own parts. I didn't necessarily tell anybody what to play. Like I didn't have a drum part written out or anything like that.
Okay.
We just kind of feel it out and talk about it and try different things. But what's interesting is that Chris and Nick, the rhythm section, they didn't really know it was going to become an album. As far as they knew, it was just like a demo.
Okay.
So they just rolled in on a Sunday. We just did like a couple of takes and that was it. And then I kind of became obsessed with it.
Great.
So it became like a real personal thing,
Perfect. Oh, that's great. And then also, your songs, we can buy the album. We're going to talk about that in a moment now.
Yes.
It just came out this last week, in the past few days. But you can hear some of the sample tracks on, is it SoundCloud?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm slowly figuring out the digital world.
Sure.
But, I have a SoundCloud. On my Facebook page, But
Okay.
also there's a band Facebook page, so it'd be Facebook/Eric Carlin and the Flood.
Okay. Great.
And yeah, there's a SoundCloud up there you can listen. And I took down some of the tracks that were up. I planned on just kind of rotating them.
Okay.
You know, maybe somebody streams it and then I take it down and they're like, oh, and then they have to buy my album. You know,
Hey, that's
I
smart.
don't
That's
know.
genius. Now, I actually did listen to some of these tracks. So, how about two in particular?
Okay.
When I heard the song "Angel in Disguise,"
Yeah.
and I like to make comparisons, and I hope this doesn't offend you, but I was
No,
hearing
it's okay.
some Allman Brothers and specifically even some Warren Haynes, who
Sure, yeah, that's cool. I wouldn't have thought the Allman Brothers. You know, that wouldn't have occurred to me, but that's cool that you hear that. I certainly like all those people you mentioned. That song, like most of the tunes, just started out on my acoustic guitar. That seems to be, since that's the instrument that I play, you know, I kind of noodle around and things sort of happen from there. But I think, yeah, that song, that's a real personal one for me. You know, that has a lot of meaning. That song, you want me to just tell you what it's about?
yeah, great.
So that tune is about essentially being on antidepressants. It's kind of a depressing song. And you maybe wouldn't know it. It's sort of disguised as maybe like a love song kind of thing.
Right, sure.
Or like a bad breakup. So, yeah, that's what that's about. And sort of learning to not, what it's like to literally to withdraw from an antidepressant and then to actually feel better and realize what was the point of that.
Great.
So that was a song that felt really good to write and sort of get out.
Well, great, and thanks for being so honest there. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Now,
for
that
sure.
song also has a guitar solo on it that is just beautiful. When
Yep.
you're doing solos, especially on this album, then, are you improvising when you're in the studio? Do you kind of pre-plan a little bit, or how did those come about?
Those solos, I definitely didn't pre-plan, but it's improv. But I would say it's 100% improv, but it's also probably just licks that I've known, or you know, just kind of going in on a whim and just kind of jamming. You know, it's in A minor, so I just did everything I could do in A minor, then go back through maybe and edit and kind of keep the best stuff. You know.
Going on to just before we do our final plug on the album here.
Yep.
You know, you are a doctor now, and you
That
teach.
sounds hilarious.
So yeah,
do,
tell
yeah.
us where you're teaching and what types of courses you teach.
Yep. So I teach part-time at Nazareth College in Rochester.
Okay.
And I guess I've been there about 5 or 6 years. And I also teach at Mansfield University.
Great.
And at both schools, I teach guitar lessons, mostly classical guitar. And I also teach, like in Mansfield, I teach guitar ensemble.
Okay.
So music written for, you know, like 4 classical guitars or a huge group of guitars, depending on how many students, or arrangements of stuff for 4 guitars. And then I also teach courses for like music education, so guitar class for music ed, essentially like taking a group of beginners through a method book so that they'll understand how to do that someday. What else? And then I teach guitar techniques courses in Nazareth for music therapy majors, which is slightly different. They have like 1 year to become functional, where they could sing songs for people and, you know, and be convincing. So I have 1 year to like take, you know, maybe a group of 15 students and teach them how to listen to songs, kind of to learn by ear and to be able to figure stuff out. And yeah, so I try to expose them to as much repertoire as I can.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to the album then, again, this morning speaking with Eric Carlin from Eric Carlin and the Flood. You live in Rochester now. Obviously, you're from
I do.
Hornell. I have agreed to have CDs available here at the radio station for anyone who wants them. But I know we have already a bunch of people who are speaking for them, and they are $10 each. Again, Eric mentioned 13 tracks, so that's less than $1 a track. For some beautiful music, you can hear some tracks on SoundCloud, on his Facebook account, which he had plugged. Eric Carlin, actually, Facebook.com/Eric Carlin and the Flood.
Yep. And I'll also, you know, if anybody, some people have already done this because I posted a long time ago, but if you want to private message me, if you're in the Hornell area, you know, I may be able to, if I get down there, I could make some kind of run or just drive them all around. You know, whatever works. But
Like a musical Santa Claus.
yes, yeah, it sounded easy at first, but now I'm getting messages from people from Hornell that now live in like California or Oregon. They want me to send them out, and but I'll still honor that. I want to get the music out there. People don't seem to want to download it. You could also buy it at CD Baby. So if you wanted to download it, you could go right to cdbaby.com/CD/Eric Carlin and just download it and have it right there, same price.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah.
Well, fans, and I know we have a lot of mutual friends, so I'd love to see everybody here at the station on Ashball Hill here in Hornell. And Eric, very much thank you for the time today.
Yes, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, good luck with the release, and thank you again for joining us on the 1480 Club.
Yeah,